there are Christians and there are Christians, meaning there are external Christians and there are internal Christians. There's a visible church and there's an invisible church. And this is a classic Presbyterian Reformed distinction, right? And so a lot of the stuff that's working out of the federal vision is working out sort of the meaning of what does it mean to have inside Christians and outside Christians, to have a visible church and an invisible church, and for the visible church to be an objective reality that God recognizes and that matters. Okay. And so as a Baptist, he goes, he doesn't want to have it work quite that way because he doesn't have infant baptism. He's not going to emphasize the objectivity of that covenant in the same way, or the continuity between the old and the new in the same way. So he's saying, I've got all kinds of Baptist reasons why I would disagree with Doug, but I think I'm just disagreeing with a Presbyterian who means it. And that's as to be expected.
And many Baptists, and I did when I was a Baptist, thought that paedocommunion, the thing that really sticks in many Presbyterians' craw,
Right.
Baptists think paedocommunion is consistent.
Oh,
Absolutely. It just makes sense. It's
right?
like,
It makes good sense.
Yeah.
So John Piper's not going to be freaked out by paedocommunion. He's going to wonder why all the rest of you guys aren't doing that.
Yeah.
Aren't doing that.
Okay.
So if I were to put my finger on the sore spot, Joe just touched on it. The sore spot in the whole federal vision thing would be the objectivity of the covenant. So it's not just internal Christian, the kind of Christian who goes to heaven when he dies. A true Jew is not one who is one outwardly, but one inwardly, circumcised in the heart by the Spirit. Someone baptized by the Spirit is elect, regenerate, going to heaven when they die. Okay? And everybody has a category for visible church, right? So you've got the roster of the elect, the decretally elect, known to God, and then you have the library of all the church directories, all the names and phone numbers of all the visible church members.
As a Baptist, I'm tracking.
Okay. So that's visible, invisible. The thing that gets me in trouble is that I believe in that distinction of visible and invisible, but I believe that the visible church really does have an objective connection to Christ in some sense.
But not in a salvific sense?
Not in a salvific sense, but an objective connection to Christ.
Through the ordinances.
And just for the visible church is the church of Christ. It's the body of Christ.
Well, when they gather, his presence is there with them.
Right. Now, the church is going to be without spot or wrinkle at the end of history or any such blemish, but it's got spots and wrinkles and blemishes now. There are dead branches in the vine, John 15, that get cut out. There are non-fruit-bearing branches in the olive tree, Romans 11, that get cut out. So I believe that obviously, if a branch is cut out of the olive tree, that's not one of the decretally elect. But it was in the olive tree. And the fact that I say there's a connection to Christ that's not salvific, but this person is in some sense attached to the body of Christ in a way that God recognizes is the sore spot. That's the thing that makes people kick. So if I said, well, the non-elect church member is a bit of tumbleweed that got caught in the branches of the olive tree, then we say, very good. Because it's tumbleweed, or the next door neighbor's frisbee kid, the next door neighbor's kid got his frisbee caught in the branches. Well, it's in the tree, but it's not of the tree. That's easy for us to process. But the illustrations of Scripture have a more organic connection. Caiaphas grew on the olive tree. Judas grew on the olive tree. And many professing Christians who apostatize or who die and go to hell, they're Christians in the sense that they're not Buddhists. They're Christians in the sense that they're members of the visible church, but they're not elect.
Okay.
So I'm a Westminsterian on my soteriology, the five solas. I'm just Westminster Confession down the line.
What the analogy, and when I was a Baptist, all of that made sense to me.
You're no longer a Baptist?
No, I'm a Baptist. When I was a Baptist years ago, that made sense to me, even as a Baptist. Yeah. And one of the things that helped, the analogy that he used in one of the books was like the wedding ring. So the sacraments are like a wedding ring. And And so there's an objective sense in which that person, those people are married. The question is whether he's a faithful husband or an unfaithful husband. So he's a real husband, okay? And God recognizes this person is covenantally obligated to fulfill his duties as a husband. So he's covenantally obligated to do so. But if he commits adultery, if he cheats, he's now an unfaithful husband, but you wouldn't say about him, well, he was never a real husband in the first place. Right? He was like, no, that's why it's really bad, is because he was a real husband. He was covenantally bound, and now he's being unfaithful to the terms of the covenant that he was in, and therefore he has a stricter punishment. In that sense, baptism and participation in the Lord's Supper is like the wedding ring. And so you say that person's really covenanted with Christ. There's obligations that person has by virtue of their baptism. And I could have said that as a Baptist. Yeah, in that sense, as a Baptist could say, yeah, they've taken upon themselves the obligations of a Christian, right? To be faithful to Christ. And now they've fallen away and they've rejected him. It's worse for them because they were really covenantally bound. And you don't sort of allow their apostasy to overturn everything that came before it.
Right. Yeah. And if there's, not to complicate this, but I think this extra complication shows how in illustrations like marriage, we understand the distinction that I'm trying to make with regard to the church. We understand it perfectly. So let's say this cheating husband comes back to his wife. He gets radically saved. He repents of his adultery. He comes back to his wife, confesses everything to her, and she receives him, and then says in her joy, finally tonight, I have a husband. Well, the reason, and if he were to say, really? I wasn't your husband before? Well, that would mean that I wasn't cheating. No, you were really cheating because you were a husband in sense A. But now that you've repented and our union is what it ought to be, he's also now a husband in sense B.